Zarnak, a cold-blooded alien assassin, moved through the darkened corridors of the grand mansion with practiced ease. Every step she took was calculated, her senses heightened to the slightest sound. The mission she had been assigned was simple: eliminate Lord Triver, a notorious alien politician known for his corruption and cruelty. He had been a thorn in the side of the Galactic Council for far too long, and the Council had hired Zarnak for one reason: she was the best. No one else could get in, get the job done, and disappear without a trace. The mansion was a fortress, Triver's fortress. The towering walls were embedded with layers of advanced security, the guards were genetically enhanced soldiers with heightened senses, and the estate was surrounded by state-of-the-art surveillance systems. It seemed nearly impossible to penetrate, but Zarnak was no ordinary assassin. She had killed beings far more dangerous than the likes of Lord Triver, and her skill at remaining unseen was legendary. As she moved through the mansion's hallways, her cloaking device activated, rendering her invisible to the naked eye. The faint hum of her stealth suit blended seamlessly with the soft whispers of the wind outside, and she felt like a shadow, one that could slip in and out of the mansion without leaving a trace. Zarnak's mission was clear: Triver had to die. Her superior had given her the green light. The alien politician was ruthless, stealing from the people, oppressing entire star systems, and eliminating anyone who stood in his way. He had to be stopped before he could do more harm. Yet, as Zarnak neared Triver's inner sanctum, a sense of unease began to crawl up her spine. She had always been confident in her abilities, but something about tonight felt different. As Zarnak silently crept past a closed door, her sharp ears picked up the sound of a faint voice. It was quiet, too quiet, and she paused, listening more closely. The voice wasn't from one of Triver's guards. No, this voice sounded human. Her mind raced. Human. In a place like this? She had heard of humans, but she had never seen one herself. The ancient, dangerous species known for surviving the harshest worlds, their resilience almost legendary. But why would an alien lord have a human locked up in his mansion? Curiosity gnawed at her. She had a mission to complete, a target to eliminate. Yet, there was something deeply unsettling about the sound of that voice. Without hesitation, she veered off course, her footfalls light as she followed the noise. It led her down a narrow, hidden hallway, a place even the mansion's guards would not normally patrol. At the end of the hall, behind a reinforced door, she found what she was searching for. Inside, a strange, human-like figure was curled up in a cage. The creature's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and its skin was pale, almost translucent. It was a human, but not one that she had expected. The human wasn't some savage, untamed creature. This one was delicate, almost fragile, like a piece of artwork. The sight was both foreign and fascinating. Zarnak's heart skipped a beat as she took in the sight. This wasn't what she expected at all. There had been rumors of humans being captured and enslaved in the galaxy, but Zarnak had dismissed them as propaganda. Now, standing in front of the human in the cage, her mind raced. What was this creature doing here? Her hand instinctively moved to her weapon, ready to pull out her blaster and end the mission, but wait. She paused. Something felt off. Was this really just a pet of Lord Triver, or was there something deeper at play? The human inside the cage didn't look like a mere animal, there was an intelligence behind those eyes, an awareness that made Zarnak stop in her tracks. She had been trained to think quickly, to remain detached from the mission. But this? This wasn't just a target. This was a person. For the first time in her life, Zarnak hesitated. She had no love for anyone, least of all a human, but there was something magnetic about the situation. The human's gaze met hers, and for a split second, she saw a flash of something: fear, hope, maybe even desperation. Was this a message? Was the human trying to communicate, or was it just her imagination playing tricks on her? She couldn't tell, but something inside her stirred. Never get emotionally involved. Never let compassion cloud your judgment. Yet here she was, standing face to face with the very being she had been taught to disdain. This wasn't just a mission anymore, it was an enigma, and Zarnak couldn't walk away without answers. She stepped closer to the cage, her mind whirring. Why would Triver have a human? What was the significance of this creature? Her eyes scanned the room, looking for any signs of a trap, any indication that this was part of a larger scheme. Then, as if the universe had decided to answer her unspoken questions, the human spoke. His voice was rough, almost broken. "Help, please," the words were weak, but the desperation in his tone cut through her like a blade. "Help." Zarnak froze. In all her years of service, no target had ever begged for mercy. She had been trained to kill without hesitation, to eliminate the threat and leave no room for second thoughts. But this was different. Zarnak's mind raced. She was here to kill Lord Triver. He was the target. She had a mission, and nothing, should be able to interfere with that. But here, in front of her, was something she had never expected, a human, enslaved, pleading for help. She didn't know why, but for the first time in her life, she was unsure. The human's fate was now tied to her decision. If she killed Triver, would she be condemning the human to a life of misery and pain? Or could she somehow save this creature, this person, who was so far from his home? Zarnak's hand wavered as it hovered over her weapon. The weight of the decision she was about to make hung heavily in the air. The easy choice was to continue with the mission, to do what she had been trained to do. Eliminate the target. But the human's eyes, those eyes, kept her rooted to the spot. She had never felt this kind of doubt before. The silence stretched on, the tension thick in the air. Zarnak could feel the weight of her next move, the consequences of what she was about to do. Triver had hired her to kill. That was all she knew. But now, she was questioning everything. The mission that seemed so straightforward just moments ago had become a web of complications. The human's fate was now intertwined with her own decisions. Zarnak took a deep breath. She couldn't afford to be distracted. The mission had to be completed. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but wonder, what kind of person would she become if she walked away from this? As the thought lingered in her mind, Zarnak made her decision. She was a professional. She couldn't let personal feelings interfere. Yet the human's eyes, filled with a mix of fear and pleading, would haunt her long after the mission was over. Zarnak stood in front of the cage, her mind still reeling from the human's desperate plea. The room around her was silent, the dim light casting eerie shadows on the walls. She didn't know what she expected when she'd first set eyes on this strange human, but what she heard next shook her to her core. The human, whose name was Ethan, shifted slightly in the cage, his movements slow and cautious, like an animal that had been trapped for too long. His eyes, though tired, remained sharp. He locked his gaze with Zarnak, as if he could sense the conflict churning inside her. "Earth," he began, his voice hoarse but steady, "it's a death world." Zarnak furrowed her brow. The term was unfamiliar. Death world? Ethan seemed to notice her confusion and smiled faintly. "You've never heard of it, have you? It's a planet, my home. It's not like any other place in the galaxy. It's a world of violence, a world where only the strong survive." Zarnak's mind was spinning. She had heard whispers about Earth, but those whispers had been filled with disdain. Most aliens saw humans as primitive, weak, and irrelevant. Zarnak had always believed that too. She had been taught that humans were nothing more than a blip in the grand scheme of the universe, insignificant and incapable of surviving the galaxy's vast dangers. But now, hearing Ethan speak of his planet with such conviction made her wonder, was there more to humans than she had been led to believe? Ethan continued, his voice carrying a sense of pride despite the obvious exhaustion in his features. "Earth is a place where wars never stop. People fight to survive, fight to protect what's theirs, and fight for something bigger than themselves. It's a world torn apart by violence, but it's also a world where people never give up. My people, we've faced destruction, endless battles, and death, but we survive. No matter what the universe throws at us. Zarnak listened intently, captivated by Ethan's words. Survival? He made it sound like it was a way of life for humans, something they lived for, something that defined them. She had seen plenty of violence in her own life, but nothing like what Ethan described. No other species, as far as she knew, had lived through the kinds of wars he spoke about. You see, Ethan continued, I'm here because I was captured. I'm a prisoner of war, taken during an intergalactic conflict that started when some of the galaxy's biggest powers decided they wanted to invade Earth. They didn't know what they were getting into. Earth isn't like any other world in the galaxy. We've fought off invaders before, and we'll do it again. But this time, I was one of the unlucky ones. The invaders, they got me. I'm not the only one. There are many of us here, trapped, enslaved, used as trophies. Zarnak's grip on her weapon tightened. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. This wasn't just any human, this was a soldier, someone who had fought for his survival. She had always thought of humans as weak, fragile beings, but Ethan's story painted a completely different picture. Could it be possible that humans were more dangerous than they seemed? The thought lingered in her mind, gnawing at her. She couldn't let it go. Here was a prisoner, someone who had been captured by an enemy, but his strength and resilience were undeniable. There was something about the way he spoke, with pride, not fear. Something in the way he carried himself told Zarnak that he wasn't broken. He was still fighting. Zarnak took a slow, measured breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She had been trained to ignore emotions, to remain cold and detached. She was a killer, a professional. She didn't get attached. Yet here she was, questioning everything. This human was unlike anything she had ever encountered. Ethan's eyes softened as he noticed her confusion, his voice gentler now. I know you're probably wondering why I'm telling you all this. You're here to kill Triver, right? I know you're an assassin. But let me tell you something. If you let him live, if you walk away, you're allowing him to continue enslaving people like me. I've seen his cruelty, and it's not just me. There are others, like me, who are forced to serve his will. And we're not the only ones he's enslaved. He's taken more lives than I could ever count. Zarnak's heart pounded in her chest as the weight of Ethan's words settled in. He was right. Lord Triver was a ruthless politician, a man who had caused untold suffering across the galaxy. Zarnak had been sent here to do the job, to eliminate Triver and stop his reign of terror. But now, things were no longer clear-cut. She had never questioned her missions before, but this time was different. A strange feeling began to take root in Zarnak's chest. It was subtle at first, an unexpected sympathy for Ethan. She could feel his pain, his anger, his desire for justice. She had always been trained to distance herself from those emotions, but she couldn't ignore the connection that was beginning to form between them. Over the following days, Zarnak found herself visiting Ethan in secret. She would slip into the hidden chamber, cloaked and invisible, and sit with him for hours. She didn't know why she did it, it wasn't part of the mission. She was supposed to be focused on Triver, on completing the job. But every time she looked into Ethan's eyes, she saw something that made her pause. He wasn't like the other prisoners she had encountered. He was strong, even in captivity. He had a fire inside him, a spark of life that refused to be extinguished. Ethan, too, began to trust Zarnak. He had been cautious at first, unsure of her intentions. But over time, he saw the change in her. There was a softness in her eyes now, a compassion that hadn't been there before. The assassin who had come to kill him was slowly becoming someone else entirely. Someone who, perhaps, cared. And Zarnak began to question everything she had known. She had been raised to believe that humans were weak, nothing more than simple creatures who could easily be crushed. But as she spent more time with Ethan, she realized just how wrong she had been. Humans were far more complicated than she had imagined. They were capable of incredible cruelty, yes, but they were also capable of immense bravery, resilience, and strength. As the days went on, the bond between Zarnak and Ethan deepened. It was an unspoken connection, built on shared understanding and mutual respect. Zarnak no longer saw Ethan as a prisoner, a mere casualty of war. She saw him as a person, someone who had fought to survive in a world that had given him no mercy. And in that, Zarnak found something that she hadn't realized she was looking for: humanity. The assassin began to question her mission. Could she really go through with killing Triver, knowing the truth about the human she had been sent to destroy? Her loyalty to her superiors was strong, but the bond she had formed with Ethan was undeniable. She had always been loyal to her mission, but now, she found herself torn between two conflicting paths. Would she honor her mission, or would she risk everything for the chance to help Ethan, and the other humans, escape from Lord Triver's grasp? The question burned in her mind as she prepared to face the most difficult choice of her life. Zarnak could feel the tension in the air as she stood before Lord Triver's grand chambers. Her mission had always been clear: eliminate the corrupt politician and end his reign of cruelty. But now, everything had changed. Ethan, the human she had been sent to kill, had shifted something deep inside her. What was once a cold, calculated mission now felt like a tangled web of emotions, loyalty, and new discoveries. Triver had always been ruthless, and Zarnak had always respected that about him. She had admired his power, his ability to manipulate those around him. But now, as she faced him across the sleek, obsidian table in his dark, imposing chamber, she couldn't ignore the knot forming in her stomach. Triver had begun to grow suspicious. It had been days since she first encountered Ethan, and Triver, ever the schemer, had noticed her distraction. "Something's changed in you, Zarnak," Triver's cold voice cut through the silence. His piercing eyes bore into hers, studying her every movement. "You've been distracted." Zarnak didn't flinch. She remained calm, her expression unreadable. "Nothing's changed, Lord Triver. I'm here to finish the job." Triver raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a sinister smile. "Are you?" "Because I've been watching you. Your hesitation isn't something I'm willing to overlook. You've been spending far too much time with the human." "I'm not blind, Zarnak." Her heart skipped a beat. It was clear now, Triver was onto her. But Zarnak had learned to control her emotions. She had been trained to stay focused, to remain detached. She had always been the perfect assassin, but something about Ethan's story, his strength, and his humanity had been slowly chipping away at her cold exterior. "I'm not here to have doubts," Zarnak replied evenly, her hand resting on the hilt of her weapon. But inwardly, she was already beginning to question her words. Triver leaned forward, his voice lowering to a menacing tone. "You will do as I say. You will assassinate my rival, the warlord who has been interfering with my plans. And you will do it quickly. But there's one thing you should know, Zarnak. Your success depends on him." Zarnak's pulse quickened as the word sank in. "Him?" she asked, although she already suspected what Triver meant. "The human," Triver said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Ethan's life is now in your hands. If you don't complete the mission and kill my rival, I'll kill him. I'll make sure he suffers. And I'll make it painful for you to watch." Zarnak's eyes narrowed. The threat was clear. Triver wasn't just manipulating her mission, he was using Ethan as a pawn, a way to control her. The cold-blooded assassin who had once been impervious to manipulation now found herself caught in a trap, forced to choose between completing her mission and protecting the human she had come to care for. Her mind raced, a storm of conflicting thoughts. She had been trained to follow orders without question. Her loyalty had always been unwavering. But Ethan's words echoed in her mind. Humans fight to survive. They never give up. Zarnak's gaze flickered to the door where Ethan was being held, and a new emotion surged through her: protectiveness. Ethan had shown her what it meant to be strong, to survive against the odds. But could she sacrifice that for her mission? Triver's voice broke through her thoughts. What's it going to be, Zarnak? You'll do what you're told, or you'll watch as I execute the human right before your eyes. Think carefully. Zarnak clenched her fists, her breath shallow. Her training as an assassin told her to ignore the emotions creeping into her mind. But as Triver continued to speak, something inside her snapped. The weight of the decision bore down on her. She had never been one to hesitate, never been one to question her loyalty. But this was different. The human, Ethan, had become something more than just a prisoner to her. He had become a symbol of something she had long since lost, a sense of humanity. Triver stood up, his voice icy. You have until the end of the day, Zarnak. If you fail me, Ethan dies. If you succeed, I'll reward you. But don't forget, he's in my hands. And I always get what I want. Zarnak's fists tightened further, her knuckles white. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the room. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, thoughts that pulled her in two different directions. Her loyalty to Triver and her mission tugged at her, but so did the bond she had formed with Ethan. She knew she couldn't let him die, not after everything he had shared with her, not after seeing the fire in his eyes, the strength that had pulled her in. She moved quickly through the corridors, her heart pounding in her chest. The mission had always been her focus, her purpose. But now, she was facing a turning point, a moment that would shape the rest of her life. Could she sacrifice her mission to save Ethan? When she reached the holding cells, the guards outside stood at attention, unaware of the storm that was coming. Zarnak glanced at them, her cold eyes narrowing with focus. She had to make a decision. As she stepped into the room, Ethan was sitting on the floor, his head bowed. He looked up when he heard her approach, his tired eyes searching hers. Without saying a word, Zarnak reached for the control panel that would release his restraints. The sound of the locks clicking open was like a gunshot in the silence. What are you doing? Ethan whispered, his voice filled with confusion. Zarnak's response was simple, but it carried the weight of everything she had just decided. I'm saving you. Before Ethan could react, the doors to the chamber burst open. Triver's guards poured in, their weapons drawn. Zarnak's instincts kicked in. She moved like a shadow, fluid and fast, taking down the first guard with a swift blow to the throat. Another guard lunged at her with a blaster, but she dodged, flipping over him and disarming him in one smooth motion. The room became a blur of action, Zarnak, fighting like the assassin she was, cutting through the guards with lethal precision. Each movement was calculated, designed to incapacitate without killing. Her heart pounded, but her focus was sharp. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Ethan, for his survival, for his chance at freedom. In moments, the guards lay unconscious on the floor, and Zarnak turned to Ethan. We need to leave now. Ethan didn't hesitate. His trust in her was clear. He stood up, wiping the blood from his lip. Let's go. As they ran through the corridors, Zarnak's mind was filled with one thought: there's no going back now. The decision had been made. She wasn't just an assassin anymore. She was someone who would fight for what she believed in, even if it meant defying everything she had known. And as they escaped, leaving the once mighty Lord Triver behind, Zarnak felt something shift within her. She was no longer a weapon. She was a protector. The night had turned into a blur of chaos. Zarnak's heartbeat thundered in her ears as she sprinted through the mansion's winding corridors, pulling Ethan along with her. Triver's voice echoed in her mind, but she pushed it aside. There was no time to think. No time to second-guess her decision. She had made a choice, and now they had to escape, before everything came crashing down around them. The mansion was on high alert. Alarms blared through the hallways, their shrill sound cutting through the air like a knife. The once sleek, silent corridors were now teeming with guards, their footsteps heavy as they rushed to intercept them. Zarnak's training kicked in as she ducked into a side hallway, pulling Ethan with her. The human looked panicked, but he followed her, trusting her instincts. "We need to move quickly," Zarnak whispered, her voice barely audible over the alarms. "Stay close." Ethan nodded, his eyes wide with adrenaline. He had never been in a situation like this before, fighting for his life, running from an enemy who was far more powerful and resourceful than anything Earth could throw at him. But there was something about Zarnak's calm demeanor, her unwavering focus, that reassured him. She had trained for this. And now, he was relying on her to get them out alive. They turned a corner and found themselves face to face with a group of Triver's elite soldiers. The guards, armed with pulse rifles, immediately raised their weapons. Zarnak didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, her body moving like a fluid shadow, knocking the nearest soldier's rifle from his hands with a single, powerful strike. She spun, disarming another guard and taking him down with a swift elbow to the jaw. The third guard was quicker, firing a burst of laser shots in their direction. "Get down!" Zarnak shouted to Ethan, throwing herself to the floor as the laser shots ricocheted off the walls. The air crackled with the sound of energy blasts. Ethan scrambled to the ground, pulling his legs in tight as Zarnak rolled to her feet and aimed a stun gun at the last soldier. The guard collapsed instantly, his body jerking as the electric current coursed through him. "That was close," Ethan said, his voice breathless. Zarnak didn't answer. Her eyes were scanning the hallway, her senses alert for any other threats. She grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him forward, deeper into the mansion. The cloaking device she had stolen from Triver's vault was still in her pocket, ready for the next phase of their escape. "Stay quiet and stay low," she instructed as they approached a grand staircase leading down to the lower levels of the mansion. "We'll use the cloaking device here." Ethan nodded, his face pale but determined. Zarnak slipped the small device from her belt and activated it. Instantly, their bodies shimmered, fading from view as the cloaking field enveloped them. They were now nearly invisible, blending into the surroundings as they made their way down the staircase. The mansion, now in full chaos, was a maze of dark corners and bright flashing lights. As they descended, Zarnak's mind raced. She knew they had to keep moving. The longer they stayed in one place, the greater the risk of being detected. They reached the mansion's underground parking garage, where a small fleet of ships awaited Triver's command. Zarnak's eyes locked onto a sleek, fast vessel tucked in the corner of the hangar. It was her way out. She could already see the ship's interior layout in her mind, the way it would allow them to escape undetected. But before they could move toward it, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, growing louder by the second. Zarnak froze. The cloaking device worked, but it wasn't perfect. It had its limits. Ethan's breathing was shallow, and his hand tightened around hers. "What do we do?" Zarnak's eyes narrowed, calculating their next move. "We don't have a choice. We fight." The first group of soldiers rounded the corner, their blasters raised, and a firefight ensued. Zarnak was a blur of motion, darting in and out of the chaos. She took down 2 soldiers before they even had a chance to react, her speed and precision unmatched. But Triver's forces were relentless. They kept coming, more and more, until the corridor was thick with the sound of blaster fire and screams. Ethan, to her surprise, was holding his own. He had no formal combat training, but his instincts were sharp. He grabbed a discarded blaster and fired, knocking one soldier off his feet. Zarnak couldn't help but feel a flicker of admiration for him. The human was more resourceful than she had given him credit for. But there was no time to dwell on that. Zarnak took a few more guards down with precise strikes, using her environment to her advantage. The whole mansion seemed to be closing in on them, and she could feel the pressure mounting. "Move," she shouted, pulling Ethan toward the ship. They ran, dodging fire, and finally reached the vessel. Zarnak didn't waste a second. She shoved Ethan inside and jumped into the pilot's seat. "Hold on," she said, tapping a few buttons on the control panel to activate the ship's engines. The ship roared to life, its sleek, powerful engines humming as it powered up. But just as they were about to take off, Triver's voice rang out from a speaker in the ship. "You think you can escape so easily, Zarnak?" Zarnak's eyes widened as the ground outside the hangar began to shake. The sky darkened, and she knew what was coming. "Orbital bombardment," she muttered, recognizing the signature of a long-range weapon. Before she could react, the sky above them lit up with flashes of bright light, followed by the deafening sound of explosions. Triver was trying to destroy them, to end their escape before it even began. "Go, go, go!" Ethan shouted as Zarnak slammed the throttle forward. The ship shot out of the hangar, narrowly avoiding a massive blast that sent debris flying in every direction. The ship jerked violently as they entered the atmosphere, dodging incoming fire. Zarnak's hands flew across the controls, her eyes locked on the rapidly approaching space above them. The ship's shielding flickered under the bombardment, but it held strong, the sleek vessel expertly designed for high-speed maneuvers. "I can't keep dodging these," Zarnak growled. "I need to jump to hyperspace." Ethan gripped the seat, his knuckles white. "Do it." With a final surge of power, Zarnak engaged the hyperspace drive. The ship lurched forward, breaking through the bombardment as they entered the warp field. The stars stretched into brilliant lines of light as they shot away from the planet, leaving the chaos of Triver's mansion behind. Breathing heavily, Zarnak slumped back in her seat, her mind still racing. They had made it. But this was only the beginning. As the stars stabilized around them, she glanced at Ethan, who was staring at her with wide eyes. "You're incredible," he said, his voice filled with awe. Zarnak didn't respond. She was already planning their next move. There was no going back now. They were fugitives, and this was only the start of their new journey together. The final battle was approaching. Zarnak and Ethan stood at the bridge of their newly acquired ship, gazing out at the vast expanse of space. The stars seemed distant and cold, but the threat from Triver's forces was all too real. After their narrow escape from the mansion, they had managed to regroup with a band of rogue human resistance fighters who had long opposed the tyranny of Triver's rule. But Triver was not the type to let his enemies slip away so easily. He had launched a massive counteroffensive, one that would determine the fate of both Zarnak and the humans she had grown to respect. Triver's fleet was vast and intimidating, a collection of AI-controlled warships armed with the most devastating weapons the galaxy had to offer. Zarnak's ship, although fast and agile, was no match for the sheer power of Triver's forces. But the humans had something the AI fleet did not: heart. They had the drive to fight for freedom, to survive, and to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. And with Ethan's help, they had a chance to win. "Zarnak, the fleet is moving into position," Ethan's voice interrupted her thoughts. "We've got one shot at this. We need to hit them hard and fast." Zarnak nodded, her expression set in determination. "I know. But we need a plan. The AI ships are too precise. We can't rely on just brute force." Ethan looked over the battle map, his eyes narrowing. "That's where Earth's tactics come in. We'll feint, draw them into a trap. If we hit them from multiple angles, they won't know how to respond." Zarnak raised an eyebrow. She had grown used to Ethan's resourcefulness. While she had been trained in the art of warfare, Ethan's understanding of guerrilla tactics from Earth was invaluable. "I like it," she said. "Let's do it." With the plan in place, Zarnak and Ethan, joined by the human resistance, made their way to the front lines. The space battle that ensued was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. The sky lit up with bright flashes as massive laser cannons from Triver's AI warships fired, while explosions erupted around them. It was a war on an unimaginable scale, with dozens of ships locked in combat, all fighting for survival. The Resistance fleet moved swiftly, using smaller, more agile ships to dodge the overwhelming fire from Triver's forces. Zarnak's ship led the charge, flanked by the other human ships. They darted in and out of the AI fleet's formation, striking where Triver least expected. Ethan's knowledge of Earth's old-school warfare tactics, like creating false signals and ambushes, proved to be a game-changer. Zarnak watched as one of the AI warships exploded in a blaze of light, a result of Ethan's clever strategy to trick the AI into targeting its own allies. "This is working," Zarnak said, a flicker of hope in her voice. "We're actually pushing them back." But the battle was far from over. Triver had one final card to play. He activated his flagship, a colossal warship with enough firepower to obliterate entire fleets. Zarnak felt her heart drop as she saw it emerge from the darkness of space, its weapons charging. Triver was not going to let his plans fall apart so easily. "We've got to take that ship down," Zarnak said urgently. "It's our only chance." Ethan's face hardened. "We can do it, but we need to stay focused. This is it." The final moments of the battle unfolded in a blur of speed and destruction. The human resistance, driven by the desire to protect their homes, fought with everything they had. Zarnak's hands flew over the controls as she dodged incoming fire, her eyes locked on the flagship. Ethan provided cover, guiding Zarnak through the barrage of fire. Together, they were a well-oiled machine, anticipating each other's moves, countering the AI forces with a mix of strategy and pure grit. But then, in the midst of the chaos, something happened that shook Zarnak to her core. A massive explosion rocked the battlefield, and she saw a familiar ship disintegrate before her eyes. It was Bonner's ship, her closest friend, a member of the Resistance who had fought alongside her since the beginning. His sacrifice had been necessary to ensure the success of the mission. He had sacrificed himself to take down one of Triver's crucial warships, creating an opening for Zarnak and Ethan to strike the final blow. "No!" Zarnak shouted, her voice raw with emotion. Her hands tightened on the controls, her mind burning with rage. She couldn't let Bonner's death be in vain. Not when they were so close. "Zarnak, we can't stop now." Ethan's voice cut through the haze of anger clouding her mind. "We've got to finish this." With a deep breath, Zarnak refocused. She had always known that war came with sacrifice, but the loss of Bonner hit her harder than she expected. He had been more than just a comrade, he had been her friend, someone who understood her like no one else. His death fueled her determination. She would not let Triver win. Zarnak and Ethan pushed forward, now with the weight of their fallen friend driving them. They maneuvered their ship toward Triver's flagship, dodging incoming fire and using every trick in the book to stay alive. The battle around them was reaching its peak, ships were exploding, and the sky was lit with the glow of countless weapons. Then, Zarnak saw it. The weak spot in the flagship's defenses. A small opening, barely visible, but enough for them to exploit. She didn't hesitate. With a swift command, she fired the ship's last remaining missile at the gap. The explosion that followed was deafening. For a moment, everything went silent. When the dust settled, Triver's flagship was nothing more than debris, drifting helplessly in space. The AI-controlled warships around them began to shut down, their systems compromised by the loss of their command ship. "We did it," Ethan said, disbelief in his voice. "We actually did it." Zarnak allowed herself a rare smile, though it was bittersweet. The battle was won, but at a great cost. The human resistance had triumphed, and the reign of Triver had come to an end. But the victory was hollow without Bonner, and she knew that the path ahead would not be easy. The fight for humanity's place in the galaxy had only just begun. As the remaining AI ships drifted into nothingness, Zarnak turned to Ethan. "It's over, but it's not the end. Humanity has a future now." Ethan nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "And you'll be part of it. We'll make sure of that." Together, they looked out at the stars. They had won the battle. But the war for humanity's survival, and their place among the stars, was far from over.